Okay. Genesis 7, 8, 9. Genesis 7 kind of picks up mid-story where we were last week with, remember, God told Noah, hey, build the ark. A flood's going to come. And so chapter 7, we have the ark is being built, or is built, rather. And God says, hey, Noah, and remember, it's Noah and his wife, and then their sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and then their son's wife. So it's 8 people, right? Math is just really not my thing, and especially this time of the day. It's 8 people, and then all the animals, right, that go in the ark. And so we pick that up in chapter 7, verse 1, where it says, the Lord then said to Noah, go in the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. And then we get this special kind of instruction. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate. And also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Okay, remember with me that we have earlier in chapter 6, God tells Noah, build an ark. I'm going to send the animals to you in pairs, 1 male, 1 female. Here we kind of get this extra bit of information that says, hey, Noah, take 7 pairs of all the birds and 7 pairs of all of the clean animals, or the animals, essentially what the text is saying there is the animals that are efficacious or effective for sacrifice. That's why. So if you only have 2 little goats, right, you only have 2 little goats in the ark, and then you get to the chapter 9, when we have like sacrifice, and we have actually chapter 8 is when we have it, and you get off the ark and you're like, we're going to build an altar to the Lord and sacrifice animals, and you sacrifice your male goat. No more goats for you, right? And that's a problem. So we got to take extra of the clean, sacrificable animals, the animals that are efficacious for sacrifice on the ark. So that's the whole reasoning there, right? Okay. Same with the birds, because birds are often used in sacrifice as well, especially once we get to Leviticus, which again should indicate to us that maybe, just maybe, the authors of this text, and again I say authors because there are plural authors of Genesis, are situated, their time of writing is far after Genesis, because we don't have the law yet. We don't have any rules for sacrifice yet, right? We don't have Torah yet. We don't have Leviticus yet, right? So some scholars think that what's happening here is people who are much further after these events, post-Exodus, even Davidic monarchy more than likely, are looking back and kind of giving reason for why some of this might happen, or giving some explanation. Oh, they probably took more animals of the clean kind, because otherwise how on earth would we still have the sacrificable animals? So remember, we're dealing with different time periods kind of talking to each other as we process through, especially this early part of Genesis. So verse 5, Noah did all the Lord commanded him. Remember, he's righteous. He's been described as righteous multiple times, right? Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. We get multiple, as we read especially chapter 7, you're going to notice a lot of things are repeated, right? We've already been told that they entered the ark in verse 1, and now we're told they entered the ark again. And then we're told already that they have all the animals, and then we're told they have all the animals again. What's happening here again, multiple authors of Genesis. More than likely what's happening here is you have one source, and you have another source, and the redactors, or the people who put Genesis together, are kind of trying to weave those 2 sources together, okay? Which is why we have some things repeated. And you're kind of reading, you're like, yeah, we've already got that. We're good with those animals. They're on the ark. We got it, right? And they're going to repeat it again. Not because they don't think you get it, but because they're weaving multiple accounts of this story together, okay? In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were opened. Remember with me, remember the very first day that we did Genesis. I told you they did not conceive of the world as we conceive of the world, right? Ancient Near Eastern peoples did not think the earth was a globe and was round. They didn't think that. They had no reason to. That wasn't their experience, right? They didn't have the science. They didn't have all that. So what they thought the earth looked like was like, this is the land. This is the dry land. So we have trees, right? We have trees and little grass and flowers and all that. And over this was like this canopy, this dome, this firmament, right? So you have like the clouds, right? And this canopy or dome is holding back the waters above. Remember Genesis 1 and 2? God separates the waters above from the waters below, right? And then up here is kind of like heavenly space. It's just where the waters above are held. So waters above, i.e. rain, and then the earth, the dry ground here, right? And then they thought that they were like these pillars that held up the earth, right? So this would be Sheol, which is not hell, it's just the place of the dead, right? And here we have the waters below. These springs, the ocean, these springs that are below the earth, right? So what Genesis tells us here is that not only was the flood a waters above situation, it was also a waters below situation. Okay, so the springs, all those caverns and caves that people like to dive into for reasons unbeknownst to me, they burst essentially, right? So not only do we have water coming from below, we have water coming from above, and it's mass chaos. We're told in verse 13 that on that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. For the 3rd time now we've entered the ark. They had with them every kind of wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kind, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, everything with wings. Pairs of all creatures that have breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. The animals going in were male and female, of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. Okay, so if you're an astute reader, you're noticing we're bouncing back and forth between, has the flood already started, or are they still going in the ark? Because we've just been told that it started raining and the floods burst, but now we're bouncing back to, and then they entered the ark, right? So again, multiple sources are being woven together in chapter 7, kind of telling the same story. That's why it goes back and forth and seems kind of out of sorts. Then we're told 40 days, it rains, the floods come up, the floods come down, all the living, and then we're told in verse 23, every living thing on the face of the earth is wiped out. Okay, that's what the story says. People, animals, creatures. It says only Noah was left. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. The math here gets weird when you look at different people and how they read this. Some people think are the 40 days and nights of rain included in the 150? I don't care. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I don't care. Does it matter? No, it really doesn't. It flooded. That's the point of the story. How many days? It doesn't do much for me either way. Okay, because is it 150 days that it's then flooded, and then it's another 150 days that we wait for it to recede? It gets real weird with the numbers. There's a lot of different ways to calculate that. I don't care. It's not the point of the story, right? It's just not the point of the story. And here's what we tend to do as postmodern 21st century Western readers of the text in America. We get locked into things like that, and we miss the whole point of the text. The point of the text is not how many days it was wet outside, okay? So we can just kind of let that go and be free of that. Now, chapter 8, verse 1, we get this beautiful, beautiful verse that we get kind of peppered throughout the Old Testament in different places, the same language, and it says this. It says, but God remembered Noah. Again, 150 days-ish, that's a long time. That's a long time to be in a confined space with your immediate family and a bunch of animals in the midst of chaos, okay? Complete and utter chaos that you have no capacity to really process with your immediate family and a bunch of animals. So 150 at least, probably more days. And then we're told that God remembered Noah. Now, when the Hebrew employs this kind of language, it doesn't mean that God forgot Noah. It doesn't mean that the rains came from below and the rains came from above. And during that, however many long days and weeks and months it was, that God somehow forgot Noah, and then it came back into God's conscious that, oh yeah, Noah, that guy. Okay, no. It just means, hey, God has always remembered Noah. God never forgot about Noah, right? This is the text's way of saying, now God's going to do something about Noah's situation. We get this same type of language in Exodus with the children of Israel who are in bondage for 400 plus years, right? And they're crying out to God, and we're told God hears their cries. Or same kind of idea. God remembers them. It doesn't mean God forgot his people for 400 years. It means that now it is time to do something about it, right? So we're told, but God remembered Noah, and not only Noah, but all the animals and all the livestock that was with him. Again, God cares for God's creatures. And God sends a wind over the earth and the waters receded. This should sound very familiar. It should sound a lot like in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. It should sound very similar to that because Spirit of God means the wind of God. The wind of God, the breath of God, was hovering over the waters. This is a new creation. This is an act of new creation. Okay, the language employed here is incredibly similar. So God sends a wind to push back the waters, to begin to make the waters recede from the face of the earth. And we're told in verse 2, now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of heaven had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The waters receded steadily from the earth. We've all been there. We've all lived through hurricanes here, right? At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down, and then we get a bunch of days, and water continues to recede, and then we see the tops of the mountains, and then they become visible, okay? Again, I don't have time to go through every single aspect of all 3 chapters, so we're skipping ahead a little bit here. Then we get this, great story. Noah opens a window, which is great that the ark has windows, right? He opens a window, he sends out a raven, and he just sees it kind of flying back and forth. There's no place for it to land, presumably, is what the text is telling us. Then he sends out a dove to see if the water has, receded enough. The dove couldn't find anywhere to perch, comes back. Noah reached out his hand, took the dove, brought it back. He waits 7 more days, sends out the dove again from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there was in its beak a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days, sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him. Again, these patterns of 7 should kind of harken us back to the idea of creation, right? This idea of a full week, this idea of even maybe Sabbath a little bit, of this is happening in increments of 7, which again locks us right back into creation. Okay? This is a new creation account. This is a new telling of God recreating things, right? Verse 13, by the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, come out of the ark. Right? Noah's like, I ain't going out there until I hear some very clear instruction to, because I don't know what it's like out there. I'd be like, we are waiting until we get a clear signal that it is safe to exit the ark, right? So he's like, okay, we get that. They bring out all of the living creatures. He brings out his family. And he tells them again, this should sound very, very familiar to us, the end of verse 17, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. We are right back again to Genesis 1 and 2, are we not? Multiply, fill the earth, all that language we get again with this, recreation. Same kind of language is employed. It is signaling to us, this story has happened before. Pay attention, right? Verse 18, so Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds, everything that moves on land, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then we get verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. That's why we need 7 pairs of them. Again, they're sacrificial animals. We got to have extras of them because we're going to do some sacrificing. Let me pause right here and just tell y'all something that happened to me this week that's relevant to this. I promise I'm not losing my mind yet. I was studying and reading, and I'm working with someone through Genesis, and she's studying and reading. She comes to me, and we're meeting, going over these chapters, because she had done her exegesis on them, and we were looking at it and stuff. And she tells me something that she read in a commentary. And I go, that's wrong. The commentary told her, it's a reputable commentary. Like, I use these all the time, right? Reputable publisher, reputable author, good commentary on Genesis. And she told me that the commentary said that this right here, Noah doing this burnt offering, is the first, this is true, it's the first time we get a burnt offering in Genesis. That's true. But the commentary said this is the first and only time we get a burnt offering in Genesis, which is not true. Have you read the story of Abraham and Isaac? Okay, yep. So I go, she just says it kind of offhanded. She's like, yeah, and that's what it, and I was like, that, and I was just like, hold on, time out, full time out actually. That's wrong. So I emailed the author of the commentary. He's a very nice man. He's a professor over in the Northeast, I think. I don't remember. Maybe the Midwest, I don't remember. So I just shoot him an email. And I say, hey man, question. The Hebrew is the same in both of these texts. What's making you say that? He's like, yeah, it's wrong. He's like, I don't know if I wrote that or if the publisher, he's like, I don't know, but it's wrong. So let this be a lesson to you that just because something is published, even if it's a reputable publisher, a reputable author, you have to read, you can't just accept it. And I know that sounds terrible and daunting. And we're like, well, we can't accept that. Like, what can we? Here's the thing. You have to read carefully. We have to read slowly. Just because something's in a commentary does not mean it's true. Which is why you need to read 4, 5, 6, 10 different commentaries on something. If you have any hope of understanding it, especially if you have any hope of teaching it, you got to read 7, 8, 9, 10 commentaries on it. Plus journal articles, plus all these things. Because what we need to have this cross-section of information that filters through and with and in and out of the other. And we also just need to be careful readers, right? So just because something is in a commentary or in a book or in a journal article or in a whatever, that doesn't mean it's accurate. So that happened to me this week as I was talking about Genesis with someone who's actively studying it, like in depth. She's in depth studying Genesis. And I was like, yeah, that's wrong, right? So just a word of warning to all of us. And don't be afraid to go, I think that's wrong. And then do some research, right? So Noah builds an altar. He offers a burnt sacrifice for the first time, but not the only time in Genesis.
I also have written
Yes.
First,
this is the first kind of burnt offering, which again, of gratitude. It's a thanksgiving offering, essentially, right? Not all sacrifices have to deal with taking away impurity, right? You read Leviticus, there are sacrifices of praise. There are sacrifices of gratitude, essentially. There are sacrifices if you had a good harvest. There's all kinds of sacrifices, right? So sacrifice is not about something needs to die to appease God's wrath. That's actually never the case in Genesis or in Leviticus. It's not why the sacrificial system exists at all. So be careful how we read Jesus' death. Just a word to the wise. Anyways, so we have here, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So God smells this pleasing aroma, which is one of the reasons once we get to Leviticus and once we get to the sacrificial system, in the tabernacle and the temple, we have daily burnt offerings and incense that are offered in the tabernacle and in the temple. Why? Not because God's angry and needs something to die, but because it is a pleasing aroma to God that the priests offer every day, even Sabbath. There's this whole long dialogue about how, hey, you know that the priests actually profane the Sabbath by offering the burnt offerings every Sabbath, so one of the commandments is greater than the other. Burnt offerings outweigh the Sabbath. So that's another way that we need to filter how we read Jesus in the New Testament dealing with the commandments in the Torah. He doesn't throw it out. Okay, so burnt offering, sacrifice, God makes a promise, I won't destroy the earth again. And then remember, back in chapter 6, we have this little tiny hint of God saying, hey, Noah, I'm going to make a covenant with you. First mention of covenant we have in the Bible, right? We finally get to kind of the explanation of that in chapter 9. Then God blessed Noah and his sons. Again, remember, this should feel a lot like Genesis 1 and 2. God blessed them, said, be fruitful and multiply, right? Same kind of language. Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and on all the birds in the sky, on every creature that moves on the ground, and on all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So apparently, up until this point, we were an herbivore society, a vegetarian bunch. And then, mostly scholars think, because there wasn't enough to go around yet, because all the plants had died, they hadn't had a chance to begin planting and harvesting things again. How are they going to survive? There's 8 of them. How are they going to survive until they can actually plant things and get things up and going? Oh, they got to eat some of the little animals they brought with them, right? So God says, hey, look, now there's going to be kind of this animals are going to be afraid of you. They're going to run away. Even the fish, they're going to run away or swim away. But you can eat them now. But there's a parameter here that's given that's really important. Verse 4, but you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from every human being too, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God, has God made mankind. So here's this provision that we actually get still into Leviticus, into the law. This right here is applicable to humans everywhere. How do I know this? Not only the Israelites. Because this right here, this whole, hey, don't eat blood thing, is one of 3, only 3 really, and some of them can be kind of collapsed in the other, but we'll say 3. One of only 3 commands that apply to Gentiles living in Israelite territory, once we get to the Torah. And if you read Acts chapter 15, the Jerusalem Council, where they basically go, what do we do with the Gentiles? They're told, hey, you will be included in kind of this community as Gentiles. You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to become Israelites. You got to abide by 3 things, though. One is don't eat blood. The second is don't participate in sexual immorality. And the third is don't eat food sacrificed to idols. Which essentially is exactly what we get in Torah. If you are a Gentile who wants to live within the Israelite community, you don't have to keep Torah. You just got to keep those 3 things. So this whole hey, don't eat blood, really important. Why? Because once we get to Leviticus, we're told, hey, blood symbolizes life. Which is why we get this whole little excursus on whoever sheds human blood, life. By humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made mankind. Again, we get this image of God language. Again, this should sound very similar to Genesis 1 and 2. And we get that whole situation with Cain and Abel, right? About Abel's blood crying out to God from the ground, right? Same kind of language is at play here. So God is telling him, hey, this is how you're going to do it. Verse 7, as for you, again, we get this command again. Be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. Then we get the covenant. Then God says to Noah and his sons with him, thus kind of symbolizing all of collective humanity is represented here. This is not just with Noah. This is with the generations that are going to come, right? I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, livestock, all wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. And this is God's promise. Never again will all life be destroyed by waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I am making between me and you and every living creature with you. A covenant for all generations to come. This is what we call in biblical scholarship, an unconditional covenant. Noah has nothing to do. There's no, you do this and I'll do this, right? The covenant at Sinai with Moses is conditional. Hey, if you don't do this, you're going to go into exile. There's certain actions for Israel to perform. The covenant with Noah, unconditional. There's no conditions placed upon Noah here or his descendants. God just says, I am making a covenant with you. This is what it is. There's really no instruction for Noah. Hey, you got to keep these laws. This is your part to uphold. There's none of that. It's just God says, I am making a covenant with you. And then God says in verse 12, he gives him a sign of the covenant. A sign of the covenant. In the Old Testament, we have several covenants, and in the New Testament as well. We get one in the New Testament that kind of gets pulled forward. But in the Old Testament, we get multiple covenants. There are 3 different covenants that have signs that accompany them. What are they? This is one right here. God's covenant with Noah, the sign we're about to get is the rainbow, essentially. What are the other 2 signs of of covenants that we have? No. These are Old Testament. Think of the different covenants that we have in the Old Testament. Nope. Go to Genesis 17. Verse 11. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be a sign of the covenant between you and me. That's the covenant with Abraham. That's one. What's the other sign that we get? This one's harder. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Go to Exodus 31. Exodus 31, verse 16, the Israelites are to observe the Sabbath, celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting covenant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. So what are the 3 signs? The rainbow, circumcision, and Sabbath. Those are the 3 times we have signs, outward demonstrations of something to remind us of something that exists kind of outside of our ability to see it. These are signs of the covenant. Kind of similar to what we think of when we do like baptism, right? Or when we celebrate the Lord's Supper. These are signs, right? They're more than that, but they remind us of something, right? So this is the first of 3 times that we get covenant accompanied with the sign. Now what's the sign? This is the sign. Verse 13, I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will set it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind of the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I've established between me and all life on earth. A lot of scholars, when you think of the rainbow, obviously it's in a bow shape. So, we have like the rainbow. It looks kind of like this, right? We have all the pretty colors, right? So what we're dealing with here is ancient Near Eastern cultures kind of conceived of this as literally like a bow and arrow, right? So you'd have your arrow, boop, right? So metaphorically, how they're reading this is that the rainbow symbolizes that God because we get language of God being a warrior, right? That's kind of peppered throughout, especially the Old Testament. All this type of language, all these types of understandings about God, or in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, their little g gods, they all kind of had this idea of the gods being warriors, right? And there are so many, especially some of them are larger than others. All the other little ancient Near Eastern people groups had their own flood story. Okay, and they're very similar. They're also very different, but there are lots of similarities between other ancient Near Eastern cultures and how they're understanding things and how they're writing about what's happening, and then how the Israelites, how these people write about what's happening. So other ancient Near Eastern cultures, you have the bow kind of symbolizing things, and it plays into their flood narratives. But what a lot of scholars think is happening here is the rainbow, metaphorically, looks like a bow and arrow, right? But God's wrath, not really. God's warrior-likeness, which we get elsewhere in the Old Testament talked about, is now pointed away from the earth, not towards the earth. Okay, this is kind of how scholars and people think about this. It is not that God's, again, like God says, his ability to destroy the earth will never be exercised through flood again. The wrath, the energy, and I don't mean that in a woo-woo way, just the making things happenness, right, is now not pointed towards the earth.
Do other cultures believe that?
I mean, Christians are really
God involved in, because here, we have text.
right. Oh yeah, they have text. They have their whole flood narratives.
Of the rainbow?
Of rainbows, of all kinds of things. Like there are overlaps everywhere, right? But this is how kind of biblical scholars conceive of what we're thinking. Because it seems like the most random thing. Like a rainbow, like that's the sign of, like it doesn't make sense unless you kind of think of it through like a picture or in a different way. So that's just kind of how they're sometimes reading that. There's a lot of, there's so much literature. If you want to go down a deep, dark rabbit hole of biblical scholarship, just look at different flood narratives from different cultures in the ancient Near East and see what the similarities are, see what the differences are, see how the God of Israel is different, see what their gods are doing, all these things, right? That's really all of Genesis 1 through 11. Is every other culture has their own version of that at that time. Okay, so we get God essentially blessing this new creation, setting up this new creation, giving the same mandate. Hey, we get this image of God language again. Remember in verse 6, we get be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. We get all of these things. And then we get to verse 18. And things go downhill yet again quite rapidly. Note with me, once again, fruit is involved. Okay? These stories are mirroring what we get with Adam and Eve in creation. Okay? That's what's happening. Pay attention. This requires close reading. Verse 18. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. That's going to become important here in a second. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. Fruit, okay? When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. He was naked, okay? Sound familiar? It should sound familiar. It should sound like Adam and Eve. Okay? Again, here's the thing. We have a pattern happening in these stories. Nakedness. Okay? Then we have alienation or strife within the family or between the people. We're about to get to that. Think Adam and Eve. When Eve gives the fruit to Adam, who's right beside her, what does he do when God comes, kind of that wind of God, and God comes into the garden? He goes, this woman did these things. Right? So we have nakedness, we have alienation or strife in the family, and then we're going to get a curse, and then we're going to get the promise that one person will dominate the other. Okay, that's about what's going to happen here, which is exactly what happens in the fall narrative in Genesis 3. Okay, pay attention. Noah drinks some wine. He's naked and uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, there we get it again. The author does not want you to forget that. Saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see that their father was naked. Now, this seems strange, to say the least. And in some ways, it seems bad, let's be honest. But it doesn't seem quite bad enough to warrant what's about to happen. Because remember with me, Ham, the father of Canaan, is about to get cursed because of what's happened here. And you're like, bro, he walked in the tent, his dad was drunk, acting a fool, he saw things he didn't mean to see. Why is he cursed? Why does he end up like this? Let me give you a little bit of background in biblical scholarship on this. There are a lot of conversations about what this actually means, what's happening here, because you get other places in the biblical text where you have this idea of uncovering someone's nakedness or seeing someone's nakedness. Other places, it means fornication. Okay? I don't think that's what's happening here. A lot of biblical scholars don't think that's what's happening here. Some biblical scholars do think that's what's happening here. Okay? So take that as you will. However, the story is it's very strange. So another idea, rather than fornication, that's happening here is that we get elsewhere in the Old Testament and in other ancient Near Eastern literature, this provision, this command almost, this strong encouragement and this expectation that sons would take care of their father if he was drunk. Okay, this is written in multiple texts. This is kind of the expectation of sons, that they would honor their father, they would take care of him, they would carry him out if they needed to, right? And they would make sure that he was taken care of and okay. That's not what Ham does here. He doesn't take care of his father, presumably. And not only that, he goes outside and tells his brothers about it. He's like, hey guys, you're not going to believe what just happened. And he doesn't do anything. He doesn't act responsibly with that. He doesn't care for his father the way his brothers do. His brothers, and it seems, in every possible way that they can, attempt to honor, respect, and care for their father in his inebriated state, right? So Ham is acting outside of what is considered honorable, which is huge, and what is expected, and what is kind of understood culturally to be what you should do, okay? And he kind of doesn't do that. He does not respect his father. So verse 24, Noah awakes. It says, Noah awoke from his wine. Which is a great way to explain that. He woke up. He maybe a little hungover, but he woke up, right? He awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him. And he said, and here again, think with me, we have nakedness, broken kind of family relationship, and now we're going to get a curse. Again, just like Genesis 3. He said, cursed be Canaan. Time out. Why cursed be Canaan and not cursed be Ham? Canaan is Ham's son, right? I can't even tell you how much biblical studies literature is written on this idea. What is happening here? Did the text revert back? Should it have read Ham? And then we had a scribal kind of situation. Because in other texts, in the Septuagint, for example, it says Ham. It doesn't say Canaan. So we have textual variants. We have different things going on. To simplify it for our purposes here, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, hey, curses back then were understood to continue through generations. Third, fourth, fifth generation sometimes, right? So regardless of if the text should say Canaan or should say Ham, both of them be getting cursed anyways, okay? That's how we're going to handle that and simplify it for us today. Cursed be Canaan, who is Ham's son. And this is how he's described. The lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers. Again, this idea of domination. Same kind of idea we get with like, hey, Eve and women, like your desire will be for your husband. He will rule over you. We are mirroring the same kind of chain of events that we have in Genesis 3. So Canaan is cursed, i.e. Ham, okay? And then Noah also says, praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. So Shem is like paired with God. Not that he's on par with God, but he's on God's side, is essentially what's happening here, okay? Shem is on God's side. He's with God, and God is praised because of this. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. Again, domination, family strife, okay? May God extend Japheth's territory. That's the other brother. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be the slave of Japheth. So we got a lot of crisscross applesauce with the brothers here and what's happening and who's getting what. Here's some key things. More than likely, what happens once we kind of start like getting down through the generations and we kind of start spreading out and whatever, is that Japheth becomes the progenitor, the father of the Gentiles, of especially if you want to get real narrow, the Canaanites. Even though we're told that, or I'm sorry, the Philistines, not the Canaanites. Ham is the Canaanites. Japheth goes with the Gentiles. Specifically, if you want to get more narrow, the Philistines kind of come from him, along with others, right? Which is why we're told that Japheth and that Canaan are going to eventually, essentially, serve their brother and not be quite as great as Shem. Because think about this, and this is how kind of scholars process some of that. When the children of Israel go into the promised land, the Philistines, and when they deal with like the monarchy and stuff, the Philistines kind of tend to be some of the people they come up against, right? And what do they do, especially when we get in the promised land, and especially once we have the monarchy and all those things? They exert power over the Philistines. And the Philistines come to sometimes, in different places, be enslaved to them, which is kind of what the text is pointing at here. So this, in some ways, yes, we get this idea of curse, we get this idea of family strife, but the text is also giving us kind of a way of saying, here's how the people groups of the earth came to be. And we're going to get the table of nations in the next chapter, which kind of fleshes that out even more. But the text is beginning to kind of explain to us, here's kind of a little hint of some of the genealogy you'll see later on. But it's all told to us within the same kind of setup and the same kind of narrative as the fall. Why? Because the flood and God receding the waters from the flood is a recreation story. So they mirror each other very strongly. We have creation, we have the animals and the plants mentioned, we have God talking to the humans, be fruitful and multiply, all of that, right? Things seem to be going well. God is involved in humans' existence in the lives of his creation. He cares about it deeply. And then we go through that nakedness, broken family, curses, domination, whole thing again. It's the text's way of symbolizing and signaling to us, still not great. Still not where we need to be in some ways. Still looking for something to remedy, to fix. This is not ideal in some ways, right? So we leave off in chapter 9 with Noah's death. He lives a total of 950 years. So he was pretty old, to say the least, right? So we end with Noah's death, and then we're kind of left wondering, well, what's going to happen now? Because we have the three sons. We have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We know some good things about them. We know some not so great things about one of them, and we kind of have an idea of what their brotherly and their descendants' relationships are going to be like, but we don't know exactly how that's going to play out. That's what we get when we get to chapter 10. We get the Table of Nations, which we'll talk about next week, that kind of explains and fleshes some of that out for us, right? And then we'll get the Tower of Babel as well, which explains and fleshes out some other things that need to be explained, right? So far, chapters 1 through 9, we have creation, rebellion, flood, recreation, rebellion in a different way. And now we're just like, what do we do now? And we're not really going to get much. We're going to get a little with Abraham. He's not a great guy still. He basically sends his wife off to be taken by other men twice. Does some other things not great. We're going to get to Isaac. has his own issues, right? We're going to get to Jacob and like, whoops, has his own issues. We're going to get to old Joseph and his brothers. And so Genesis is going to just kind of set us up to understand the rest of the biblical narrative. It's going to set us up to understand the families that we're going to be dealing with. It's going to set us up to understand kind of some of the patterns that we're going to see. It's going to set us up to understand where the rest of the story goes. You don't get to the book of Exodus unless you go through Genesis. So Genesis really, in a lot of ways, one of the reasons we're studying it is because it kind of holds, maybe not pride of place, but it holds this incredibly important place in our understanding of the whole biblical text. We don't understand the New Testament really if we don't get Genesis in some way. The Gospels make a little less sense to us. Books like Hebrews make a little less sense to us. Revelation makes a lot less sense to us if we don't kind of grasp what's happening in Genesis. Let me just point us back to this idea, and then we'll talk and we'll ask questions and we'll process together here. That Genesis thus far has demonstrated, if nothing, it's demonstrated one thing to us, and that is that God is present and active and caring for his creation. Even in the midst of rebellion, even in the midst of just the messiness, even in the midst of when it tells us earlier, the whole earth is filled with violence, people have no good inclination in their hearts whatsoever, God is present and active and caring towards his creation, even in the midst of that. And he is continuing to, again, we see this in Genesis 1 and 2, we see this here again. God is continually inviting humans into what he is doing. I'm going to make a covenant with you. I'm going to be with you. Be fruitful and multiply. I'm going to bless you. All of that we get over and over and over. These are beginning to become patterns that we will see through Genesis, and some of which we'll see through a good bit of the rest of the text. So Genesis has a lot of these kind of key themes, these key ideas that we're going to begin to see become more and more established as we go. So it's a good foundation to have. Okay, 7, 8, 9, it's a lot. We didn't get to talk about everything in them, but we have a few minutes here. If I miss something that you're like, I'd really want to talk about that, or if you have questions or thoughts, or maybe you've heard something else, what else do we notice about 7, 8, or 9, or even all of Genesis thus far? What's maybe sticking out to us? What questions do we still have? What things are interesting? What things are weird? Which there are several. What things are we noticing or questions do we have?
This is a weird question.
Yep.
It really doesn't matter.
That's a great way to set yourself up, Kathy. It's a not super important question and it doesn't really matter. Okay. Shoot.
I'd always heard, but then I feel like there was someplace in Genesis you brought up. I'd always heard that the people had not seen rain. Does it mean like I'd always
Yeah.
rain had always been
It's
like
come,
June.
yeah.
That's how the plants.
Right. I'm trying to remember if that's actually mentioned in chapter 6 or 7. She's asking about, like, does it say in the text, or have we just heard that this is the first time we have rain? I know what you're talking about. I'm trying to remember. Well, we're told in chapter 2 of Genesis, if you look back at chapter 2, we're told in verse 5 that God had not yet sent rain on the earth, but that the earth is watered from the springs below. I think that's what the verse you're thinking of. Because it says, now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground, but streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface. I think that's what you're thinking of. So we don't know if that has carried through to the time of the flood, and this is the first time those waters from above have fallen. The text isn't completely clear, but I think that's the verse you're thinking of, that initially at least, and maybe presumably to the time of the flood, not sure, the ground, at least in Genesis chapter 2, was watered from below and not from above. Yeah, but I don't know if that continued. You have people who say it does, because I've heard people say, one of the reasons that no one believed Noah was that they'd never seen rain before, right? But I'm like, here's the thing. Even if you had seen rain, I still don't know if you would have believed Noah. And also, you're not getting on the ark. So it doesn't matter if they believe. This whole thing of like, oh, Noah's like proselytizing the people. If you'd only believe, come on the ark. No, God's pretty clear about who he wants on the ark. This is not a Noah becomes like some like witness for the gospel situation, right? So I don't know if there's any merit. Maybe it didn't rain yet. I don't know. But that's the verse that kind of signals people who think that, which is fine. Like, yeah. What else? What else do we notice from the text or questions we might have?
One more question.
Go for it.
Do Native Americans have any history of this?
Okay, so
Geologically, we have some signs.
yeah, geologically, we don't really have signs of a worldwide flood. We have signs of localized flooding, absolutely, of a grand scale. There is no geological evidence of a worldwide flood. There's just not. I'm not going to lie to you. There's just not, right? She asked, though, do Native Americans or First Nation people have stories of this? I don't know if they do, to be honest with you. I know they have their own creation kind of narratives, right? They're not ancient Near Eastern people, though, right? So they're not Mesopotamian. They're dealing with it. They're in a completely different part of the world, completely different time. They do have their own kind of creation narrative. They have their own kind of way of understanding how they came to be as a people. There actually is, and I can't remember if it's just the New Testament or if it's also the Old Testament. Recently, maybe this year or last year, Zondervan or IDP, I can't remember, I think it's Zondervan, I could be wrong, published a translation of the New Testament. I hope they do an Old Testament, that is translated by and for kind of First Nation people. So it translates more into how they kind of conceive of the world. It's fantastic. It is so interesting to read. They had really good translators working on that committee and working alongside of them. It is excellent. If you want to kind of if you're like, man, I've been reading the NASB or the NIV or the NLT or whatever for years, and I really want to read something different, just to kind of, I'm studying and I just need something else to read, a different translation to read this passage in to kind of like get out of my funk. It's excellent. I can't remember what it's called. But it was published, I think, last year or this year. So that does exist, but I don't know if I think it's only New Testament. Otherwise, I would say, let's go look to see if what their translation of the Old Testament says or if they have notes about it. But they hopefully are doing an Old Testament one. I can't remember what it's called. I could find out real quick. Any other questions or thoughts while I look this up?
I don't understand
Yes.
why there would be an argument
Mm-hmm.
about and looking for a flood that covered the whole earth
Mm-hmm.
when their idea of the earth was so different than
Mm-hmm.
the word what.
Exactly. But biblical litericists, they need that whole flood all over the earth. God bless them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, until Christopher Columbus, they didn't know the world was round.
Yeah, I mean,
Why do they think
yeah. Yeah, it's so we're told that, hey, he goes to the top of the mountains, yeah, so many questions about, again, they conceived of the earth this way, so if they're not even aware of the fact that the earth is as big, so all these types, again, you have to decide, I have to decide at some point in time how I'm going to read Genesis 1 through 12, or 1 through 11. Am I going to read it literally? That this is exactly how, or are you going to say, maybe this is more again, and I realize this is, choppy water to wade into with things. Is this more like capital M myth pointing to the capital T, true capital G God of the world? And that's okay. Christians for centuries have read the text that way, just like Christians for centuries have read the text literally. Either way, but at some point, it's really hard to jump back and forth. It's really hard to say Adam was literal, is a real person, but the flood was only, you got to kind of pick a side almost. And it's not that one side's better than the other. These are just how Christians have read the text for some time. And until we get to chapter 12, it's all kind of like every other ancient Near Eastern culture has these stories. The Bible tells them in a unique way, yes. Do we believe that the Bible is pointing to the one true God over and against these little g gods of the nations who are really not that great? Yes. But again, I'll text you later if I find that Bible. We're kind of left wondering, much like we were, remember, with Adam and Eve, and then we have Cain and Abel. Abel dies. Then we have their other son, and we kind of set this whole thing up, right? We're kind of left wondering, how do you repopulate the entire world with 3 couples? Someone's marrying their cousin. Okay, which again, not a huge deal back then. We kind of had that throughout the Bible, right? But like, that's a lot to do, and that's going to take a really long time. Yeah, if you're living a bit, but I mean, again, that's still 900 years to get, a few generations, especially since they're living so long. If you're only living to be 50 and you're able to have 5, 6, 7 kids maybe, okay. But if you don't start having kids until you're like 120, like, it's taking forever if you want to read it literally, which can still be done. And the other side, both sides have their pros and cons, like everything, right? But we're going to get to chapter 10, and you're going to start getting like all these descendants. And then all of a sudden, it's like, how long did this take? Hundreds of years, right? So again, Genesis kind of just leaves us with these questions that for many of us, like Sunday school and like the church, have kind of like brushed under the rug for a long time. They're like, just read it this way. I'm just telling you, there are multiple ways within Christianity to read this text. So if you're a science-minded person, and you're like, this does not track for me if I have to read it literally because I'm looking at science, which I believe God created as well, it doesn't make sense. You are welcome, and you can find a space and a home in the text. If you want to read it literally, and that's how you can find a space and a home within the text, you'll be just fine. But every time I teach, especially Genesis, I want to make sure people know yes, we as Presbyterians have certain ways of reading text. We really don't have certain ways of reading Genesis 1 through 11. We care about covenants deeply, so the covenant with Noah we're really locked into, right? So that's what we're going to spend time on that. We understand that God is present in his creation. Like, there's some key things that Presbyterians are like, yes, and we're like, yes. But outside of those things and things that are like necessary for salvation, Orthodox Christianity, meaning like what's considered right and not going to get you like kicked out, there's a pretty big pool to swim in. And you can find a home in that pool even here at MDPC. And so just if the text is troubling to you, that's okay. That's okay. There are people here who I love talking about that. And you're okay. You can find a home and a place within the text, especially Genesis 1 through 11. Now, there are other texts that we're going to be a little bit more like, yeah, not a whole lot of wiggle room here. Not a whole lot of wiggle room with Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, right? But a little bit more of a wider pool to swim in when it comes to Genesis 1 through 11. Do we believe it's pointing to the one true God? Yes. Do we believe there is only one true God? Yes. Do we believe it's the God of Israel who reveals himself fully in Jesus? Yes. Great. The text is kind of open to you at that point, right? Okay, any last minute things? Got about 60 seconds left. Yes.
I'm curious about the Canaanite, right?
Yes.
So, is this like foreshadowing
Yep, Canaanites.
forever? So, what am I to take away about, what am I to know from this text about Canaan going forward?
Yeah, you kind of get this little signal that you should pay attention for when Canaan pops up, because we know it's already not going well for them. Yeah, so it's kind of like a little like backstory that's going, just planting the little seed in our minds that when we eventually get to them later in the text, which we will, you're like, oh yeah, kind of didn't have a great start there. Might be signaling of not so great things to come. So I think that's what the text is inviting us to consider. Great question, great question. Okay, let me pray for us and we'll be done. Lord, thank you so much for your goodness and for helping us get through 3 whole chapters, which was a lot. God, we love you and we trust you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.